Babe Ruth once said, "Baseball was, is, and always will be to me the best game in the world." And he'll get no arguments from us here at the Golden Silence podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Theater of the Golden Silence podcast. Your tickets have been taken, and the vendors are making their rounds with peanuts, Cracker Jack, and other stadium fare, so hurry and find yourself a seat, and be mindful that objects may leave the field of play. There will be a lot of home runs, I think, today. Oh, and enjoy the show. But before we take any swings, I just want to remind you to follow the Golden Silence cast on Instagram for the most up-to-date information on this little podcast. And for all of you tweeters on the Twitter, the Golden Silence podcast exists there as well. Just search for Golden Silence Cast or tweet us at Golden Silence 1. It's in these cyber spots where we let you know what films are coming up and how best to watch. You'll also find fun, historical pictures, and show facts and news. Then we reconvene here for a bit of infotainment amongst friends. The scoreboard is telling us that today's feature is Headin Home. This film is of note due to its legendary star. This 1920 film marks the big screen debut of baseball icon Babe Ruth. While known mostly for feats of legendary baseball action, he had a surprisingly robust filmography. Well, for a ball player, that is. Here in the States, spring in general, and April specifically, means the return of our national pastime, baseball. And as a kid growing up, baseball was my number one sport. I grew up playing it, grew up watching it, collecting baseball cards, the whole 9 yards. And even here in Pittsburgh, where we have the Pittsburgh Pirates, opening day is the day of the most excitement of the baseball season. Now, don't get me wrong, the Pittsburgh Pirates are more often than not terrible. But for one day every year, in early April, there is excitement. The team sells out the stadium. There's festivals. Kids take off of school. Adults take off of work. It is the best day to be a baseball fan. And as legendary all throughout the major leagues, opening day is a special time. So I thought, what better way to celebrate baseball's opening day than by watching some baseball action on the silver screen? And this seeing Babe Ruth make his acting debut seemed like the perfect movie to take that spot. But before we get too ahead of things here, let's look at what was going on in the world in 1920 and how some of those events worked their way into Headin Home. On January 3rd, the New York Yankees purchased outfielder Babe Ruth, who you may have heard of, from the Boston Red Sox for $100,000. Adjusted for inflation, that would be about $1.4 million in 2021 money. January 17th, Prohibition in the United States begins, with the 18th Amendment to the Constitution coming into effect, and outlawed the production, transport, and sale of intoxicating liquors. On May 2nd, the very first opening day for the Negro National League Baseball League. On August 16th, Cleveland Indians shortstop Ray Chapman is struck in the head by a pitch from the New York Yankees' Carl Mays in a game at the Polo Grounds. He dies 12 hours later from a fractured skull, making it the only fatal field accident in Major League Baseball history. On September 27th, Babe Ruth hits 2 home runs and accounts for all 3 runs scored in the Yankees' 3-0 victory over the Philadelphia Athletics. The 2 home runs bring his season total to 53. He hits his 54th and final home run 2 days later. And in 1920, throughout the year, the League of Nations was formed. In November of 20, it held its first General Assembly in Geneva. At its height, the league consisted of 58 member states. In Headin Home, Babe Ruth overcomes many an obstacle to smack dingers and win the love of his heart and hometown. If I was blessed with prodigious home run power and chopped and carved my own bat, I would most certainly do it for the love and affection that can only be provided by the movie description. Headin Home is a 1920 silent sports film that gives us an alternate reality Babe Ruth origin story. Headin Home was directed by Lawrence C. Windom, maybe, written by Arthur Bugsbear and Earl Brown, starring Babe Ruth, Ruth Taylor, William Scheer, Ralf Harolde. Cinematography by Ollie Leach and distributed by the Yankee Photo Corporation and released on September 19th, 1920. For this episode, my notes and breakdown will be in regards to the Amazon Prime version of the film. In case you haven't noticed yet, Amazon Prime is a great resource to dig into silent films. While some of the quality of these Prime Video versions can be a bit hit or miss, it's a nice addition to your free shipping. For my first viewing of Headin Home, I was pretty happy with it. The picture quality was good, and the music was good. Sometimes the movies here can come without music, but the music that was with this certainly fit. It gave me a baseball vibe, like an organist was playing. If you wanted to catch this flick on physical media, Kino Lorber has a 2-disc DVD set called Real Baseball, baseball films from the silent era. This set includes 2 features, Headin Home and the Colleen Moore 1919 film, The Busher. This set also includes 11 shorts. I haven't seen this version, but I figure it has to be of decent quality. I've yet to see a Kino Lorber release anything of terrible quality. And I'm sure I'm going to dig into it in the future, though. I have read that there are some scenes edits that differ in this version, so that is definitely something to be aware of. Versions of this film exist on YouTube. The quality and video lengths vary. But at the end of the day, though, Amazon Prime Video or Kino Lorber DVD are probably your best bets to get a little Bambino in your life. Now, George Herman Babe Ruth Jr. was born on February 6, 1895 in Baltimore, Maryland. According to BabeRuth.com, George Jr. was one of 8 children, although only he and his sister Mamie survived. George Jr.'s parents worked long hours, leaving little time to watch over him and his sister. The lack of parental guidance allowed George Jr. to become a bit unruly, often skipping school and causing trouble in the neighborhood. When George Jr. turned 7 years old, his parents realized he needed a stricter environment and therefore sent him to the St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, a school run by the Brotherhood of Laymen from an order of the Xaverian Brothers. St. Mary's provided a strict and regimented environment that helped shape George Jr.'s future. Not only did George Jr. learn vocational skills, but he developed a passion and love for the game of baseball. In a Major League Baseball career that spanned 1914 to 1935, Babe put up crazy Hall of Fame numbers. He started as a great pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, but became a legend as an outfielder for the New York Yankees. In his time in the Bronx, Ruth established many long-lasting records, including career home runs, runs batted in, walks, slugging percentage, and an on-base plus slugging percentage. In 1936, Ruth was elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame as one of its first 5 inaugural members. While he was smacking homers and putting legendary numbers up, that success didn't always translate to Hollywood. While he made a number of film appearances, with a couple exceptions, they were largely unsuccessful, either critically or box office-wise. 2 of his most notable appearances came in the 1928 film Speedy, which starred Harold Lloyd, and Gary Cooper's 1942 classic, Pride of the Yankees. Ralph Harolde was born Ralph Harold Wigger on May 17, 1899, in the great city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. According to IMDb.com, Harold first appeared on stage with the Pittsburgh Stock Company at the age of 16, though with little formal training. His first paycheck amounted to $15 a week. After a year's absence, serving in the Marine Corps near the end of World War I, he returned to the theater with another troupe of Pennsylvania players and in due course portrayed just about any type of personage, from youngsters to old-timers. Having eventually worked his way to leading man, Harold seized an offer by noted impresario David Belasco to act in a Pacific Coast touring production of The Front Page. The success of the play led to interest from various film studios, including Warner Brothers. Now, between 1920 and 1963, he would enjoy a very solid film career. Harold would appear in 99 films, with Headin Home in 1920 being his film debut. 1935 and 1936 were especially productive, with him appearing in a combined 17 films. Some of his other notable films included Jimmy the Gent, Night Nurse, A Tale of Two Cities, and Murder, My Sweet. Ralph Harolde passed away at the ripe old age of 75 on November 11, 1974, in Santa Monica, California. Now, the writer of the film, Arthur Bugs Bear, was a humorist and sports writer. He was born on January 9, 1886, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Bear got his start in Philly and was soon a national name known for his humor and witticisms. According to BaseballHistoryDaily.com, Bear worked for the Philadelphia Public Ledger, the Washington Times, and William Randolph Hearst's King Features Syndicate, before moving to Hollywood, where he wrote several film scripts, including the titles for Headin Home, the first movie Babe Ruth appeared in. Bear would also be prominent in the New York City journalism and entertainment scene for many years, also working in the sports journalism and cartoonist ventures. Arthur Bugs Bear also lived a long, fruitful life. He would pass away on May 17, 1969, in New York City at the age of 83. Now that the player introductions have been made, it is time for the ceremonial first pitch. And by ceremonial first pitch, I mean, let's have a chat about this movie's origin story. Let's talk about the pieces that had to come together to get the Babe his start in the moving pictures. Before we get going, I need to introduce the article that was a godsend to this episode of the Golden Silence podcast. It is called An Illustrated Guide to Headin Home, Babe Ruth's First Feature Film. It was magnificently written and researched by Tom Schieber and can be found at baseballresearcher.blogspot.com or Google it. If you're a fan of silent films, behind-the-scenes info, or classic baseball info and stories, this piece is for you. It is pretty much better than any commentary track for sure. Info that I quote from it is just the tip of the iceberg. I can't praise this article enough. Show Tom Schieber some love by checking out the article and following Tom at T Schieber, that's T-S-H-I-E-B-E-R, on Twitter for wonderful vintage baseball info. With the knowledge that Tom Schieber is probably the foremost authority on Headin Home, I will step aside and let him tell us a bit about the birth of this fun baseball picture. This is what he says. While Ruth's first brush with motion pictures proved to be a bust, just months after making his debut with the Yankees, the Bambino once again signed a movie contract. On July 19, 1920, the very day Ruth hit his 30th homer, thus topping his previous season's home run mark, newspapers reported that the undisputed home run king had been awarded a deal to star in a film titled Headin Home. 5 days later, just prior to the start of the July 24th game against his old Red Sox teammates, Ruth made it official, signing the contract in a ceremony at home plate. Now, if I do say so myself, that's a pretty rad setup. You don't get that kind of showmanship these days. With everything on Twitter or elsewhere in cyberspace and television, big announcements lose a little heart and soul. I love the touch of flair in signing a contract at home plate. And I don't think anyone else but Babe Ruth could pull that off. Schieber continues, the deal was generally reported as calling for $100,000, and Ruth himself often promoted that figure, but the actual salary was for half that amount, with $15,000 up front and $35,000 to come later. Alas, Ruth never did see that second installment. So with the movie contract signed at home plate, it would be a long wait to the off season for the Babe before he can film, free of baseball commitments. Nah, I'm just kidding. It was a different era of life, to be sure. In a turn of events that would never happen today, never, ever, ever, Babe Ruth would film Headin Home during the season. Unlike the West Coast attempt at capturing the Babe on film, this movie was to be shot during the playing season and near New York City area, Schieber tells us. In fact, even before Ruth signed the contract, filming of scenes not involving the Bambino had begun. But with Ruth in the fold, shooting would begin in earnest in mid-August when the Yankees returned to New York from a 19-game, 19-day road trip. Now, I think it's all well and good to get one of baseball's biggest stars to sign on the dotted line, but you also need folks on the other side of the camera to bring a movie to life. And again, Schieber relates some info about the producers of Headin Home. Adam Kessel and Charles Bowman were veterans of the motion picture business, Schieber tells us. They helped finance Max Sennett's Keystone Studios in 1912 and signed Charlie Chaplin to his first movie contract the following year. Though the duo hadn't been involved in producing movies for some 3 years, in July 1920 they returned with the bang signing of Babe Ruth through the Yankee Photoplay Corporation, unaffiliated with the New York Yankees baseball club, producing the 6-reel feature film Headin Home. Today, Other than Babe Ruth, the only name associated with the film that has stood the test of time is that of Raoul Walsh, the movie's production supervisor. And as for directorship, Schieber adds contemporary sources disagree as to just who directed Headin Home. Some state that Walsh was the director, while others give the nod to the otherwise forgettable Lawrence C. Windom. Now, with all the pregame festivities behind us, it's game time and movie time, or in the case of Headin Home, both. The film opens with a fun little cartoon of a batter swinging at a pitch. We are then introduced to Babe Ruth in Headin Home. Tons of fans are making their way into the polo grounds to watch Babe and the Yankees play. The team makes their way from the clubhouse to the field. You can see the players are wearing black armbands as they walk out. Tom Schieber tells us why this is. The movie starts with scenes shot at the New York Polo Grounds, home to the Yankees from 1913 to 1922, he says. Here we see Babe Ruth lead a contingent of Yankees out of the clubhouse in center field. Note that the players are seen wearing black armbands on their left sleeves. On August 16, 1920, the Yankees' first day back from their extended road trip, Cleveland's Ray Chapman was hit in the head by a pitch delivered by Yankees pitcher Carl Mays. The shortstop died the next morning. For the rest of the season and throughout the World Series, the Indians donned mourning bands in memory of their much-loved teammate. But what is often overlooked in the tragic story is that the Yankees and numerous other clubs, both in the American and National Leagues, also wore similar armbands. Even the Yankees' head trainer, Doc Woods, with his unique jersey featuring his job title on the front, wore an armband, Tom Schieber informs us. In our introduction to Babe Ruth, we learn he made the nation of leagues forget the League of Nations. After a brief glimpse of Babe in the dugout, we are treated to some more game footage. Now, this film is told in flashback, basically. The character Eliar Lott, get it? Eliar Lott, is spinning this yarn at the baseball stadium about the life and times of Babe Ruth. Eliar Lott is played by W.J. Gross. He tells us that Babe was born in Havelock. It's one of them growin' towns what's turned out many a famous man. Maybe. Schieber gives us a little insight into the cinematic birthplace of Babe Ruth. Here the title card introduces the fictional town of Havelock, the birthplace of Babe's character, and a thinly veiled nod to Haverstraw, New York, where most of the outdoor scenes for the movie were shot. At the time, Haverstraw's population was just over 9,000, while today it numbers around 12,000. Babe lived with his mother, who was played by Margaret Snedden. Snedden appeared in 104 films between 1915 and 1951. She was born on November 18, 1872, and died on April 17, 1968, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She is with his foster sister, Pigtails, played by Frances Victory, and her dog, Herman. Pigtails is playing with Herman when we learn how his mother felt about his baseball career. His ma knew that Babe would be a big man someday if the pitchers would throw it anywhere near him, the intertitle tells us. We also find out Babe puzzled the squirrels considerable. He used to spend his time in the woods chopping up nature into baseball bats. We see Babe chop down a tree and eventually uses to make a bat. Our next character to be introduced is one Cyrus Tobin. According to the film, Cyrus Tobin was banker and owned the town, lock, stock, and barrel. He was played by James A. Marcus. Marcus was born on January 21, 1867 in New York City. Some of his notable films include Regeneration, Oliver Twist, and Sadie Thompson. That is just a few names from his 109 film appearances. He would die from a heart attack on October 15, 1937, in Hollywood, California. Cyrus Tobin is a hefty dude smoking stogies, like any potentially evil landowner in films. But while Cy owned the town and his daughter Mildred owned both. This is our first glimpse of Ruth Taylor playing Mildred. Ruth Taylor was born on January 13, 1905 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She got her start in films after being discovered by Max Sennett in 1925. In 1928, she played Lorelei Lee in the silent version of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Though only appearing in a handful of films, she did great work in them. She would live to be 79 when she passed away in Palm Springs, California on April 12, 1984. Now, it's this point in the film where we're also introduced to Cy's son, John. He is played by Ralf Harolde, whom we mentioned earlier. We find out he is back in town on break from college. John and Cyrus do not get along. They argue a bit before, as the movie tells us. The boy said he was sick of this one Ford town and left for New York on the passenger milk train. John walks out, leaving his father and sister behind. We are next introduced to Doc Hedges, the town dog catcher, played by George Halpin. Doc Hedges will be a bit of comic relief throughout the film. At this point, though, he catches Pigtail's dog, Herman. Now, Lott tells us what the town thought of Babe. He says, "The most we thought of Babe was that someday he would go on to a bigger town where there was more loafing to do." We're back in the woods watching Babe carve his bat from that tree he had just chopped down. Doc Hedges, meanwhile, is putting Herman in the dog cage while Pigtails goes out to yell for Babe. He hears her and comes over to see what's wrong. While they talk and Babe calms her, we cut over to Herman in the cage. He is having a vision of what will surely happen to him if he stays locked up. In his vision, he is put into a meat grinder by a sadistic butcher who turns him into hot dogs. Luckily, spoiler alert, that's not the case. Babe and Pigtails make their way to the pound. Luckily, Doc Hedges isn't there at the moment, so the two open the cage and get Herman out. But before Babe leaves, he sets all the dogs free. With Herman and the other dogs free, Babe and Pigtails leave. Doc Hedges returns to find an empty cage and no pound puppies anywhere. The next character we're introduced to is the town barber, Tony Marino. We are told the village barber was the reason why Safety Razors was so popular in Haverlock, and he managed the ball club. Schieber notes, Walter Lawrence plays Tony Marino, the town barber and manager of the Haverlock baseball team. Lawrence, whose cinema claim to fame was an uncredited role in Citizen Kane starring Orson Welles in 1941, is seen here pouring liquor into a bottle labeled Bay Rum, a typical aftershave of the era. Prohibition began early the previous year with the ratification of the 18th Amendment on January 16, 1919, but the teeth behind the amendment, the Volstead Act, was not passed until October 28, 1919. Perhaps this is why the barber is hiding his hooch, or perhaps he is simply trying to avoid having his wife catch him drinking. But all was not well in Haverlock. Pitcher Harry Knight was arriving in town. The whole town practically turned out to the train station to welcome their new star pitcher. And this star pitcher was going to be joining Cyrus Tobin's baseball team and Haverlock's baseball team. That pink letter feller thought he was the whole red alphabet. He was to be pitcher and bank clerk for Cy, Eli Lott tells us. This pitcher and future jerk was played by William Scheer. Scheer was a British-born actor, Birmingham to be exact. He was born on August 20th, 1889, and died on July 10th, 1933 in New York City. One of his earliest pictures actually had Headin Home ties. In 1915, he had appeared in a film called Regeneration. It was directed by Raoul Walsh and starred James A. Marcus, who both played big parts in Headin Home. Now, Harry Knight comes in like a magic man and starts flirting with Mildred. Babe makes his way in and meets Knight. Being the jerk he is, Harry Knight wastes no time in disrespecting the young Babe. Babe wants fisticuffs, but Big Pigtails is the voice of reason, saying to go easy as funerals come high these days. Schieber notes, this scene, as well as a few subsequent train station scenes, was shot at the railroad station in Valley Cottage, New York, located about 5 miles south of Haverstraw. Up next is a fun segment of the film. We learn that Deacon Flack was in a sweat to get 50 pounds of ice for the church festival that night. Well, before the fun ice delivery bit, we got to get back with Harry Knight, who we are told this feller Knight had more names than hamburger steak. He was as crooked as a dog's hind legs. After a quick pop-in with Babe and Pigtails, we are transported to the town church. Pastor of the church, Dave Talmadge, was played by Charles Bart. A lot of Bear's writing for this flick has proven to be fun and folksy throughout the movie, like his description of Harry Knight, and the character study into Dave Talmadge is awesome too. There was nothing bigoted about our new minister. He approved of ice cream and sarsaparilla in moderation. That's good stuff, folks. Good stuff. So the church congregation prepares for their party, festival, shindig, event, thing. Now this is that fun sequence I mentioned a bit ago. So remember that 50-pound block of ice? Well, our Babe has been entrusted with its safe passage from ice house to church. So he picks it up, but is quickly distracted. This is going to be a recurring occurrence during this trip. Distraction 1. He runs into Mildred, who Babe was both heels over his hat in love with. Distraction 2. Babe runs into some fellas playing hole ball, a game like musical chairs with holes in a ball. The eliminated player gets a ball thrown at them. Babe throws the ball, misses, and sends it through a window. The guys scatter. Distraction 3. Those same guys are now playing baseball, and Babe can't resist a game of baseball. He sets the ice down and takes the mound. Another errant throw, but this time it hits Cyrus Tobin, who is with Harry Knight. Cy rushes the mound to give Babe the what for. Babe, now with a considerably smaller block of ice, arrives at the church. I had forgotten to mention that this whole voyage, Babe was also carrying his homemade tree bat. While at the church, we are introduced to Elmira Waters, who has a crush on Babe. They say love is blind and infatuation is cross-eyed. Elmira was a happy medium between the two, Lot tells us. But no sooner does Elmira start trying to get on with the Babe than Mildred pops in to try and get Babe's attention. Babe takes leave of her but looks back bummed to see Harry Knight slide in to mingle with Mildred. But before we leave the church, let's let Tom Schieber tell us an interesting little story about Babe, a bug, and this church scene. Babe enters the church carrying the ice in his left hand. For those paying special attention, the rest of the scene is shot in such a way as to quite purposefully avoid showing Ruth's right hand. In late August, Ruth's right hand was bitten by a bug. Some sources blame a mosquito, others a wood tick, still others called out a chigger. Whatever the culprit, the wound became infected, and on Friday, August 27th, doctors operated on the hand. Apparently, the surgery was unsuccessful, or complications ensued, and so on August 30th, a second operation was performed. This last bit of knife work must have done the trick, as Ruth was back playing ball on September 2nd. The injury did not stop Ruth from working on the film, but it did cost him 6 games with the Yankees, 2 against the White Sox, 3 against the Browns, and 1 against the Red Sox. And while the half-dozen games didn't adversely affect the Yankees, they went 4-2 during Babe's absence. It's likely that the accident deprived him of a couple home runs. Still, the slugger ended the season with a whopping 54 homers. Contemporary sources differ on where Babe was when he was bitten, but all agree that the incident took place while Ruth was filming, not playing ball or otherwise biding his time. As his right hand appears to be fine in the outdoor scene shot in Haverstraw, it is safe to say that the injury only became an issue afterwards, when most of the indoor scenes were shot at the Biograph Studios. Still, it seems likely that the bite itself occurred in Haverstraw. So now at this point in the movie, Babe has now left the church. As he walks down the street, he gets involved in a fight between the barber and his wife. Being a peacemaker was not his strong suit, as he is unable to quash the quarrel. He eventually makes his way back home and enjoys a meal with his ma in pigtails, but his ma wanted to know why he was staying home on the big festival night of gaiety, mirth, and soda pop. So I know the number one question is, as you listen to this, what sodas were featured? What sodas were people drinking in the 1920s? Well, I decided to look around and I found out some of these soda trends. I was able to find this on the dailymeal.com website. They say, within just 10 years, Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola Corporation dominated the national soft drink market. But despite this, the 1920s still saw dozens of smaller regional producers enter the soda drink game. What made the 1920s unique was the development of 2 distinctly different flavor trends: fruit sodas and neutral sodas. Orange, strawberry, and grape sodas were in, and companies like New Grape, Grapette, Bluebird, Brandywine, and Noosie joined the fray. But the cocktail craze and prohibition also created a demand for other sodas that could be used as mixers. At At social affairs, we learned that the babe was a fish out of water. As he eats, the barber is also eating. He is having pasta, with copious amounts of garlic. Eli Lot chimes in, man for man, that spaghetti was stronger than the White Sox infield. When I watched the movie the first time, I didn't connect the White Sox line with 1920, but Tom Schieber did. This is what he has to say. Here, Bear compared the barber's garlicky pasta to the Chicago White Sox infield. It should be remembered that over the prior 3 baseball seasons, 1917 through 1919, the White Sox had captured a pair of American League pennants thanks in great part to a stellar infield that included first baseman Chick Gandil, second baseman Eddie Collins, shortstop Swede Risberg, third baseman Buck Weaver, and catcher Ray Schalk. It was not till late in the 1920 season that rumors of a number of members of the club, including Gandil, Risberg, and Weaver, intentionally losing the World Series games the previous year would come out into the open, resulting in the 1919 White Sox being dubbed the Black Sox. Babe was apprehensive about attending the festival for fear of seeing Mildred canoodling with Harry Knight. Babe decides to attend. When he arrives, lots of slapsticky shenanigans ensue. First, the barber bombards his barbershop quartet with terribly garlicky breath. Then Babe accidentally spills stuff on Cyrus Tobin. Now fully embarrassed, Babe hits the road. Harry Knight is full-on villain in the next scene. He has been promoted to cashier/teller at Tobin's bank. But since he is a jerk, he is skimming money from the customers, and we learn that he is using that money to bet on the Havelock versus Highland baseball game that he will play in and will determine the championship of the vicinity. The barber is also the bookie, as an FYI. The babe is lakeside when Mildred paddles her boat by him. He wanders out into the water to greet Mildred. He is distracted by the dog catcher, who has been hassling Babe through a good portion of the film. Babe gives chase to the dog catcher, catches him, and promptly tosses him into the drink like a sack of potatoes. The victorious Babe strides back to Mildred, but finds Harry Knight sitting in the boat with her. Now we're going to do a bit of transportation of sorts. Cyrus the Virus is handing out uniforms to his ball players. Harry sits there smoking. Babe tries to get a uniform, but Harry Knight is having none of it. He says he will quit the team if Babe even gets one button off of a uniform. Then Babe up and tells him he'd be playing the Polo Grounds when Knight was selling 1 peanut in 2 bags. Speaking of the Polo Grounds, what is the Polo Grounds? They have already been referenced a handful of times throughout Headin Home, so I turned to saber.org for a little more info. SABRE is a Society for American Baseball Research. The following comes from an article there written by Stu Thornley. Just an FYI, that's a great name, by the way. This is what Stu Thornley tells us about the Polo Grounds. The Polo Grounds is actually the story of several stadiums. The final 3 were located beneath Coogan's Bluff in Upper Manhattan, but there was another location for the original Polo Grounds, the first stadium to use the name, and the only one on which polo was actually played, at the corner of 110th Street and 5th Avenue, just north of Central Park. Thornley continues, the Polo Grounds, an odd name for an odd stadium, was home to several baseball teams, most notably the New York Giants, until the team moved to San Francisco following the 1957 season. Its horseshoe-shaped grandstand and elongated playing area provided for ridiculously short distances down the foul lines and equally ridiculous long distances to the power alleys in center field. So short were its foul line distances that inches were sometimes included in the measurements. 279 feet 8 inches to left, 257 feet 8 inches to right. As for the distance to center, the figure could have been rounded to the nearest 100. So just to wrap up on what Stu was telling us, it was in your best interest to hit your home run to left or right field, because the distance needed for a center field dinger was about 483 feet. Some reports even put that deep center wall at 505 feet, which is nuts, and incidentally why no center field homers were ever hit. A dismayed Babe returns home. He goes back to working on his tree bat. His ma tells him not to worry. He'll be a big baseball star someday. Now it's time to the intro for our first real baseball action of the film. The team from Highland is coming to Havelock for a battle of 2 rivals on the diamond. but before any pitches are thrown, we got to have some shenanigans. The Highland pitcher makes a quick stop to the barbershop of Tony Marino. And don't forget that Marino is also Haverlock's manager. Delilah cut Samson's hair, but this barber filled this Samson with old jump steady moonshine, we're told by Eli. So Marino gives up his hidden hooch, and the Highlands star pitcher leaves drunk. Eventually, the Highlands manager finds his star hurler passed out. Luckily, they see Babe standing with Pigtails and Herman. Babe is finishing up his bat. With his pitcher boiled like a New England dinner, the manager offered Babe a job, we're told. Babe didn't want to play against his hometown, but an insistent Pigtails convinced him to take the offer. Babe couldn't fit into the Highlands uniform, so he improvises a reasonable facsimile thereof. All the while, Babe's status is in question. The town is preparing a huge parade heading to the ball yard to celebrate the big game. As the crowd files into the field, some special spectators show up. Schieber tells us a little bit more. Just prior to the beginning of the ball game, we see a number of disabled children seating themselves on the third base side of the field. These are youths from the New York State Hospital for the Care of Crippled and Deformed Children in nearby West Haverstraw. Though the movie makes no attempt to weave their story into the film, it is appropriate that these young boys were included, as Babe had a genuine affection for children, most especially those who were underprivileged or disadvantaged. In the lobby card for the movie, we see Ruth on the diamond at Eckerson Field showing his baseball bat to these same children. Today, the state hospital is now known as Helen Hayes Hospital, a physical rehabilitation facility still located in West Haverstraw and named for the famous actress who was a longtime resident of Nyack, New York, and whose daughter Mary died of polio in 1949. After a smidge of crowd footage and game footage, it is time for Babe Ruth to step up to the plate. And at this point, he is using his standard issue random baseball bat. Babe's ma is in the crowd looking on with worry. Cyrus is also there laughing at Babe. And on the mound is that jerk Harry Knight. Knight ain't giving Babe anything to hit, and the home plate ump wasn't helping matters. Mildred, Pigtails, and Herman also watch from the stands, as does Eli Lott. At the plate, Babe strikes out. In the field, he isn't much better. A handful of misadventures leads to runs scoring. Not stellar defense for sure. In one bit, Babe falls going after a fly ball. He misses, but is now more concerned about his busted shoe. Pigtails runs onto the field and uses a hairband to help make a temporary fix to the shoe. All while this is happening, everyone on base scores. As the game continues, the film cuts away for a second to see folks at the church installing a beautiful new window, or winder, as Babe puts it. When we hop back to the game, Harry Knight is still chugging along, and we find out it's the ninth inning and the score is 14-14. So, should Cyrus, Mildred, and Harry be excited about his talent as a pitcher when he gives up 14 runs? I mean, now to be fair, without a box score, I can't make any exact claims as to how he did, but still, a lot of runs were scored on his watch. And the barber and manager who left him in also deals in betting. Bad pitcher / manager, or something far more sinister. Anyway, Babe steps up to the plate with 2 outs. Again, he gets garbage. Nothing but garbage. He loses his cool and destroys his bat. He then calls for Pigtails to bring him his war club. Finally, Knight serves something serviceable up to Babe, and he crushes it. Absolutely crushes it. Crushes it so hard, it goes right through that beautiful new church window. The hometown crowd wanted to lynch a hometown boy for making a home run for the wrong town, Lott tells us. After Babe wins the game for the rival squad, he is chased. And chased some more through the now mean streets of Haverlock. As the chase continues, we pop into the church where Miss Almira is blaming the broken window on the Babe. The preacher man won't believe it, considering how far away the field was. The chase scene gives us a bit of comedy. Doc Hedges, the dog catcher, sees Babe running towards him. He thinks Babe is after him, so he runs. Babe is close on his heels, and Hedges doesn't know that Babe is running from his own unruly mob. The crowd corners Babe, but he gets a bat and starts fighting back. As he swings at folks, the minister intervenes. The crowd ran Babe ragged, but the minister got up in time to save the mob, we are told. Babe's manager congratulates him as a worried Pigtails runs up to hug her brother. Cyrus waves the goons away, and a despondent Harry Knight is consoled by Mildred. For all of Babe's hard work, the manager gives him advance on his pay. It was a munificent sum. And the town that Babe's homers made famous was driving him out for making the first one there. Babe is at home now, looking dapper with a suit on. Babe is leaving, and Pigtails is inconsolable while his mother remains stoic. He leaves the money he just made for his family. While that is happening, that scoundrel Harry Knight is booking it out of town. He calls for Mildred to join him. They both run to the train station. Babe is also making his way to the train depot. Cyrus lights up a stogie at home, only to notice a note from Mildred. It reads, "Dear Father, I'm going away with the man I love. Forgive me, Mildred." The cigar drops from his mouth before he stamps out. He's going to find his girl. Harry and Mildred are anxiously awaiting for their grand exit when the gal got remorseful, changed her mind like a woman, and stuck to it like a man. She sees what a skis Harry is and wants none of his shenanigans. Harry, in an attempt to woo, forces himself upon her. Luckily, Babe pops his head in the old window of the station. Babe runs in and literally kicks Harry Knight's butt. He kicks him right through the window. Babe runs out, grabs Harry again, and drags the scumbag back in to kneel before Mildred. Babe made that crook apologize in 6 languages and Esperanto to Mildred. Now, I was surprised to see an Esperanto reference dropped in this film. I was under the impression it was a relatively newer thing, but actually it was created in 1887. Esperanto is the world's most widely spoken constructed international language. It was created by a Polish ophthalmologist, L.L. Zamenhof. I know it from Incubus, a 1966 film starring William Shatner that was filmed completely in Esperanto. So Harry apologizes and is promptly deposited on the train by our hero Babe. Babe returns to console the heartbroken Mildred. Doc Hedges alerts Cyrus to his daughter and Babe's whereabouts. He and apparently the whole town show up at the station. We see that her old man figured she'd trotted off with Babe and was sorer than a ringworm. Mildred tries to explain her situation and Babe's heroics, but a defeated Babe shakes Mildred's hand, says a kind word or two before letting himself out the window. Babe was heading away from home. Throughout this time, Babe put in his time with the Highlands team, only to get noticed by the big time. In New York, Babe meets back up with younger Tobin. Babe saw young Tobin with a flashy-looking gal and knew the kid was being took, we learn. Another ball player confirms Babe's suspicions. Back in Haverlock, Cyrus and family commiserate about their wayward John. In New York, Babe and John reminisce about their homes and families back in Haverlock. Time jumps forward a touch and we see Babe officially sign his first Major League Baseball contract. With contract in hand, he tells his new bosses he's heading home. The film tells us he'd been away 2 years when Haverlock started to hear from the man that put the town on the weather reports. We see Cyrus Tobin excitedly read a newspaper with an oddly small headline in the middle of the paper that says, 2 more home runs for Babe. For a bit of investigative awesomeness, let's turn back to Tom Schieber again. He says this, "It is quickly apparent that the newspaper is not a prop. If it were, the fabricated paper would feature a much more dynamic headline about Babe. But here, the headline of interest takes up just a small portion of the frame. Now that we can be assured that we are seeing a real newspaper, we can delve into the various visual clues to see what we can learn. The headline at center states that Babe hit a pair of homers and the Yankees won 3-0. Going through each game played by the Yankees in 1920, I could only find 2 dates in which the Yankees won by the score of 3-0. August 28th versus the White Sox and September 27th versus the Athletics. But as you may recall, Ruth did not play on August 28th due to his bug bite. That leaves the September 27th game, and on that day Ruth did indeed hit 2 home runs. This information implies that the newspaper dates from the day after the game, September 28th, or possibly a late edition from September 27th. Also in his guide to Headin Home, Schieber also breaks down the other elements partially seen in the newspaper review that also, after some investigating, also points to a September 27th or 28th edition of the paper. It is really awesome stuff if you check it out. Which, again, I'll say this a million times. Please do check it out. It is a fantastic read. We get a bit of game film showing Babe hit those dingers. Pigtails and Ma open a letter from Babe. It talks about his big league contract and anxiously awaiting his return home and how much he is looking forward to Ma's famous apple pie. His sis and mother are ecstatic about the news. Babe isn't the only one heading home, though. After his talk with Babe, John Tobin makes his return to Haverlock and the Tobin Mansion. This intertitle tells us, the kid told the old man that Babe sent him home, which made Babe as solid as the rock that made the Prudential famous. Cyrus takes a moment to rethink things and hugs his boy, and Mildred joins in. The family is back together. Now it was Babe's turn for a triumphant return. Babe steps off the train. The day that Babe came home will be remembered as long as Haverlock remains a small town, which will be always. On his way back to town, Babe runs into Deacon Flack. The deacon wastes no time in presenting a bill for the broken church window from earlier. Babe doesn't hesitate to repay the bill. The bill was for, I believe, $13.75, and Babe hands Deacon Flack a $50 bill and continues on his way home, where he finds Pigtails waiting for him. His mother runs out and they all hug. Babe gives his family gifts before heading back out. The next stop on the victory tour is the Tobin house, where he reunites with Mildred. Just as Babe is about to give Mildred a ring, John enters. Babe tells him the room is overcrowded and to try the second show. Babe tries again to give the jewelry to Mildred, but is interrupted by Cyrus Tobin this time. Cyrus pulls Babe away to chat. Babe explains his intentions with Mildred to Cyrus. Cyrus approves and allows Babe to get back to his planned proposal, and the two kiss as he puts the ring on her finger. The film ends with all the citizens of Haverlock that we met in boxes at the Polo Grounds watching Babe Ruth play. Harry Knight is even there. And danged if that crook Knight wasn't selling peanuts and stealing the shells, the inner title tells us. And with his friends and family watching, Babe steps up to the plate and smacks a game-winning home run, and the team and crowd storm the field. And that, folks, is the end of Headin Home. And with that is the final out of the Golden Silence podcast. But nothing better to do than after a sporting event than to do a little post-game analysis. Let's talk about what worked and what didn't. The first thing I got to talk about is the Sultan of SWAT himself, Babe Ruth. He makes this movie. His performance is this movie. His charisma definitely jumps out at you. As a lifelong baseball fan, I have always heard stories about the Babe, but to actually see him in motion is surreal, but super cool. Even though he's playing a fictitious version of himself, he shines, and for the first time in my life, I see that charm of his in action. And my whole life, I had only ever seen newsreel footage or stuff of an older Babe Ruth. I always have this vision of him at a certain age, towards the end of his career. And so watching this movie was strange to see such a young Babe Ruth. And to see just the body changes, the personality change of something I was so used to one way, but to see him in a totally new light, I thought was a fantastic and definitely worth the price of admission to see this flick. For everything that Babe brought to the film, though, the story taketh away. To me, the story seemed all over the place. Cyrus Tobin at the beginning is given a Mr. Potter and It's a Wonderful Life vibe. I felt he was made to be a landowning villain, making Babe's life difficult, but that doesn't last. Jerkwad pitcher Harry Knight is posed as a villain, with his thievery and anti-Babe Ruth actions, but he's out of the film pretty quick as well. He was a great villain, and I thought he would be Babe's main antagonist throughout the film, but nope, not happening. At least there was a payoff with him selling peanuts at the end. And then there was Mildred Tobin. Throughout the early bits of the film, to me, she was made to be a man-hungry woman using the two men for her own gain, a femme fatale who is trouble for any man brave enough to try and tame her. But again, not really. She ends up being a good love for Babe Ruth. So basically, three villain softballs are lobbed up, but the film doesn't really connect on any of them, at least for me. But I do have to send out some praise for Arthur Bugs Bear. I super enjoyed his witticisms and silly writing. I liked his slice-of-life jokes and puns a lot. And some of the stuff he mentions and says in the movie, I hope to remember long enough to transition and try and use them in my life. They were just so funny and so witty. So between Babe and Bugs, those two guys did a lot of heavy lifting in keeping this movie fun. Now, Tom Schieber, again, is our man with the plan and the info when it comes to this film. And there's no one better to listen to talk about its big premiere than with this little bit from Schieber. In July of 1920, longtime boxing promoter Tex Rickard signed a 10-year lease on Madison Square Garden. This in the day when the indoor venue was located at the northeast corner of 26th Street and Madison Avenue. Rickard did so in hopes that New York would reinstate boxing, but there were delays in doing so. On Friday, September 3rd, in an effort to recoup some of his losses, Rickard paid $35,000 for the rights to debut Headin Home at the Garden for an exclusive 8-day run. Not only did Rickard pay a hefty sum for the exclusive rights to the movie, but he also laid out a good deal of money prepping the Garden for the debut. He constructed what was, at the time, the world's largest movie screen, 27 by 36 feet. And in order to project the film on such a large screen, he had a special movie projector built with what was, at the time, the world's most powerful projector lens. At the movie opening at Madison Square Garden, in front of an estimated crowd of some 6,000 moviegoers, Lieutenant James Tim Brimmen and his Black Devils band provided musical accompaniment for the film and performed the recently published song, "Oh, You Babe Ruth." Despite premiered at MSG, the world's most famous arena, and playing on the biggest screen ever, true success never really touched home plate for Headin Home. As was mentioned earlier, payouts were never made, and it all happened despite Adam Kessel and Charles Bauman's best efforts to get back into the producing game. Adam Kessel and Charles Bauman pushed hard to promote the movie, but Headin Home never became that hit the duo had bet on, Schieber says. The movie ran off and on throughout the country for a few years. In fact, it played at Smalley's Theater in Cooperstown, New York, as late as May 22nd, some 14 years before Ruth himself would travel to the upstate New York Village to help christen the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum as one of its first 5 inductees. But ultimately, the film failed to make money, and less than 2 months after the movie opened, Ruth's attorney, David W. Kahn, filed an involuntary bankruptcy petition against the Yankee Photoplay Corporation, claiming the $35,000 still owed Ruth. Additionally, Biograph Studios claimed it was owed $1,062 for rental of its studio. As far as I can tell, neither Ruth nor Biograph received another cent. That postscript to this film was again provided by Tom Schieber. A lot of the great insight into this film came from Tom in his unillustrated guide to Headin Home, Babe Ruth's first feature film. His work on his film guide was incredible, and the quotes I use here are just a fraction of the info and deep dives he did to really get inside the making of the film. I can't encourage you listeners enough to give it a read. It definitely deserves it. Now, while Tom Schieber has contributed much to film history and preservation with this phenomenal article he wrote, I reached out to him to contribute to this little podcast. He was gracious enough to take some time out of his busy schedule to give us some inside baseball on his work compiling this incredible guide. So I was able to speak to Tom over some emails, and I want to share with you some of the questions and answers that we exchanged. I asked him, what are your connections to silent film? Were you always a fan, or did its baseball connections draw you in? He replies, I was not a fan of silent films as a youth, but as my general interest in classic movies grew, so did my interest in silent films. Baseball has always been an interest of mine, so it was natural that I would combine that interest with movies. I asked, what bits of info proved to be the hardest to track down? How were you able to overcome those challenges? He replies, I was interested in most anything having to do with the movie, but I was particularly hoping to determine the locations of many of the non-studio scenes in the movie. A few have still eluded me. For example, as I note in the blog post, the scene in which Babe consoles John Tobin on the steps of a church is still a mystery to me. I'd love to figure out where this was shot. What were your goals in researching Headin Home? Did you think you'd find the treasure trove of info you ended up with? I had no goals going in, he replied. I just followed the leads where they took me. Still, I don't think I could have expected to determine as much as I did. With the footage of a young Babe and game footage filmed at Yankee games, where do you feel Headin Home ranks as a movie and as a historical baseball document? He replies, I think it's a surprisingly good film, mostly because Babe turned out to do a fine job acting. He was very natural in front of the camera, which is 90% of the battle. The actual game footage is invaluable because those particular clips, though not shot specifically for this movie, more likely for newsreel films, are not found anywhere else today, at least as far as I am aware. I asked, how long did the illustrated guide to Headin Home take you to make, from conception to completion? I first began researching the movie in 2011, so in a sense it took me nearly a decade to complete. However, I was obviously not working on it constantly throughout that time. I had earlier made a PowerPoint presentation about the film that I gave a few times, but it wasn't quite as exhaustive as the blog post. When I finally got serious about expanding that PowerPoint presentation into the blog post, it probably took me about 2 to 3 weeks of working nights to get it done. Now, again, thanks again to Tom for answering some questions. And if you want to read more of his work, if you want to check out this blog post about Headin Home, just head on over to baseballresearcher.blogspot.com. Again, that is baseballresearcher.blogspot.com. So as we head into our next segment, a bit of fair warning that numbers are about to start flying around at high rates of speed. But I know we can get through this together. So, a little more Babe Ruth info. Babe Ruth, after a few movie appearances and a whole lot of home runs, called it a career in 1935. I know you all want totals, so check this out. He left the sport with a .342 batting average, 2,873 hits, 714 home runs, 2,213 runs batted in, and as a pitcher, a 94-46 record with a 2.28 ERA. He was also the first to hit 50 home runs in the season, which he did in 1920, while filming Headin Home. In 1927, he was the first batter to hit 60 home runs in a season, and the first to hit 500 career home runs, which happened in 1929. And just because I haven't already overloaded you with crazy good Hall of Fame statistics, here are a few more to add to that cornucopia, that smorgasbord of statistical information, in list form to boot. So he was a 2-time All-Star, 7-time World Series champ, 1923 AL MVP, 12-time AL home run champ, 6-time AL RBI champ, AL batting champ in 1924, and the AL ERA champ in 1916. Now, this was all tallied over a career that spanned 21 years and 3 teams, those being the Boston Red Sox, the New York Yankees, and the end came in 1935 with the Boston Braves. And while we're discussing Hall of Fame numbers, let's talk a bit about the Cooperstown, New York home of baseball legends. Befitting his status on the field, Ruth was a member of the first ever MLB Hall of Fame class. This comes from baseballhall.org, the online home of the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. The inaugural Hall of Fame election results were announced in the media on February 2, 1936, and featured Ty Cobb, Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson, Babe Ruth, and Honus Wagner as a class of 36. After 20 more members were added to the Hall of Fame in the elections of 37, 38, and 39, The first induction ceremony was held on June 12, 1939, with all 11 living electees present in Cooperstown. So now, before the grounds crew files into the theater, don't forget, the show is not over yet. As we lay this episode to rest, it is time to find out where your favorite Silent Age stars are laid to rest. This is the segment where we join our beloved matinee idols on the other side of the cemetery entrance. The history, the art, the celebrity spectacle, the cemetery exploration converge in Where Are They Now? Your guide to paying your respects to the baseball superstars that have entertained us so much. Now, the Babe would die of throat cancer at the age of 53 on August 16, 1948, in New York City. But before he died, there was still a little bit of legend to be written, and Babe would not go quietly. In an article entitled, "No One Told Babe Ruth He Had Cancer, But His Death Changed the Way We Fight It," written by Eleanor Cummins, she dives deep into the Babe's diagnosis. This article can be found on Popular Science's website at popsci.com. She writes, "He was the Babe, the greatest baseball player who had ever lived, and his medical team at what is now Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan, just a short train ride south from Yankee Stadium, intended to treat him as such. While it seems possible that no one ever told Ruth himself, the baseball legend had terminal cancer. A tumor had grown from behind his nose to the base of his skull, and was working its way into his neck. Treatment would be harrowing, but his doctors were determined the Sultan of Swat would get better. Though their effort to save him was ultimately unsuccessful, the record-setting Ruth became a cancer pioneer in the process." Now, Babe Ruth would undergo many painful and kind of scary procedures. He would take experimental injections, chemotherapy, and radiation treatments for a year, but they would all prove fruitless in the end. Cummins writes, "But in the process of that trial and error treatment," Dr. Nadim Bekazi reports, "Ruth became perhaps the first patient to receive sequential radiation and chemotherapy. Now called chemo-BEMO, this two-pronged approach is standard treatment for many cancers today. Perhaps most significantly, the publicity Ruth's disease would eventually receive helped to eat away at the stigma cancer patients felt for centuries." Now, the Sultan of Swat's body would lay in rest at Yankee Stadium for 2 days and was visited by over 100,000 fans. His open casket was placed on display at the rotunda of Yankee Stadium. His funeral mass took place at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Now, Ruth rests with his second wife Claire on a hillside in Section 25 in the Gates of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York. This cemetery can be located at 10 West Stevens Avenue, Hawthorne, New York, 10532. According to the cemetery's website, the land for Gate of Heaven Cemetery was purchased by the trustees of St. Patrick's Cathedral in 1916, and an initial Gothic design replicating St. Patrick's Cathedral was accepted for the property, and cemetery development began immediately. Eventually, the cemetery would be consecrated on July 14, 1918. If you get a chance to see the Babe's grave, you will see a granite monument depicting Jesus blessing a little boy in a baseball uniform. Another thing you will see are things, tons of things and mementos to honor the Bambino. People will leave bats, gloves, and other Yankee-centric things, but it's the odd stuff that stands out. This next bit is from the New York Times. Ruth was known for his prodigious appetites, and over the years fans have left cigars, cans of beer, and bottles of liquor. The tributes are so plentiful that the cemetery workers must constantly thin them out, John Caro, the cemetery superintendent, said. One item fans tend to leave is a hot dog, a nod to Ruth's ability to eat more than a dozen hot dogs at a time. And with that, it is officially time to close up the Theater of the Golden Silence podcast. But before we go our separate ways for a bit, remember to hop on Instagram and check out Golden Silence Cast, and on Twitter at Golden Silence 1. Let us know what you thought about Headin Home and George Herman and Ruth's acting, or what you thought of this episode in general. I dig your feedback and want to make this show as great as possible, and knowing what you think helps out a lot. And if you listen to this on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please rate and leave a review. It helps the show a ton as well and helps me know if I'm doing good or not. I also want to send out huge thanks to Tom Schieber again. He deserves so much credit for his exhaustive, mega, super deep dive into Headin Home. I can't recommend his illustrated guide to the film enough. The info I dropped throughout this episode is just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more to learn about the making of a silent film and to learn about baseball in 1920. And I want to thank him especially for taking time out to talk to us here. It means a lot for a little show like this to get some time to get some answers behind some of these works that go with these silent films that we love so much. And if you want to see his illustrated Headin Home guide or just learn more cool baseball stuff, go to http://baseballresearcher.blogspot.com, and I will put that link in all the show's social media avenues and cover all the bases. And as always, a big thanks to all of you fine listeners for all of your fine listening. And remember, the silents are golden, and the talkies are just a fad.